Hi, my name is Shady Atia, professor at Liège University in Belgium, and I'm going to present you today qualitative research methods. Well, this presentation is the first of a series of presentations on qualitative research methods, and there is a playlist on my YouTube channel. I would like to recommend you to follow up the following videos that go more into specific in more detailed methods, but this presentation is giving a general overview on qualitative research methods so that you have an idea. The audience of this presentation is mainly researchers who are preparing a research thesis or a dissertation or conference or journal publication. They are looking to conduct the research and communicate it, and therefore they need to know this approach as an approach to conduct their research. And the goal of this presentation is to enhance your capacity to conceptualize, design, and conduct in qualitative research, qualitative method-based research. Well, also the aim of this presentation is to conduct a data analysis for qualitative research, how to do that, investigate methodology of this particular approach, and provide some specific advices for each steps to help reaching your objectives. So stay tuned, it's a very interesting presentation, and it's an opener for several following presentations on qualitative research methods. Well, this is the scheme that I developed to structure the different research methods. And as you can see, I grouped the research on the left side under quantitative methods, mainly the modeling approach, the empirical approach, and the experimental. But I'm going to talk in this presentation and the following series mainly on qualitative methods. And my focus here is to provide a general presentation on qualitative research methods, and later on you will find follow-up videos on systematic reviews, content analysis, observation or ethnographic observations, in-depth interviews, focus group, usability, case study, sketch, and 3D models. And even in the future we go beyond depending on the request of our viewers. Well, so as you can see, this is the division of the two different types of methods, and in general there are people who are attempting to mix those approach, and when people use methods from the quantitative realm or from the qualitative realm, we call that the mixed method approach. So this is a general slide that you need to have in mind that can help you to structurize your methods, and later on we will provide videos for each of those approaches. Well, let's go started. When we talk about qualitative research methods, we can group the research methods under two major classifications. As you can see on the left side, the population-based qualitative research methods, where we are looking at surveys, polls, interviews, focus group observations, and here human beings or people are the object where we get our data, so they are the source of our data. While on the other side, these are research that we call the desktop research approaches, where we have document. We look at online research, literature review, case study research, and those are the main two groups of methods that we can find under the qualitative research title. Well, so back to the objective of this presentation. The goal here is to enhance your capacity to conceptualize, design, and conduct in qualitative methods-based research, and to have an overall idea what is the process for this research methodology. Well, as I said before, we will look at how to select qualitative data generation and how to look at different analysis methods, what is the particular approach of this methodology in general, and the content of this presentation will look at introducing qualitative research, talking about some qualitative research methods, how to do sampling, how to do validation, what is a mixed method research, and conclude the presentation. So let's start first of all an introduction. Well, first of all, I need to explain to you a very important term. It's called epistemology. Epistemology is simply the theory of knowledge, especially with regard to its methods, validity, and scope, and the distinction between justified belief and opinion. And you as a researcher need to know what are the epistemologies that are used in your field, in your domain, in your department, in your area of research, so that you are aware about the different epistemologies. So we have different paths of research, and it has to do with the culture, with the history, and the general practices. Another important term that you will need to know for this presentation is called the research design. Well, the overall strategy that you choose to integrate the different components of the study in a coherent and logical way, thereby ensuring you will be effectively addressing the research problem, is named the research design. It constitutes the blueprint for the collection, measurement, and analysis of data. So when we are working on our research proposal and we are developing the concept or the study concept, we look at our research design. So we start to design our research, and normally when we do that, we try to select the methods and the methodologies that are best appropriate for our research question and for our research problem. And in this sense, this step, this phase where we start to discuss and check and optimize the choices of our methodology and methods, we call it the research design. So this presentation is very helpful to help you during the process of your research design when you are designing the setting of your research and selecting the methodology and methods for your research. As you know, any research design is based on 4 major steps. Research design requires that you describe your data collection process, your data processing, your instrument creation, or what is the thing you are coming up or you are going to create. Is it a framework? Is it something to understand? Is it a model? Is it a tool? Is it a policy? Is it an action plan? Whatever you are going to get, is it a methodology? The instrument, we call it, that you will come up and create. And finally, we talk about how you apply it and validate it. So these are the 4 major components in any research design. And once you have an idea what are your methodology and methods, you have to answer to the question, how are you going to collect the data? How are you going to process it? What are you going to make with it at the end? And finally, how you will test what you developed or created and how you will apply it. So let's move now to qualitative research in particular. Well, what is qualitative research? Qualitative research is simply entailing looking at phenomena or event from the perspective of the people. So we try to understand, describe, and define the event from the personal experiences of the people. We do that by collecting documentation about the research problem, by observing people, or by interviewing them, or by discussing the research problem in a focus group, or by testing their interaction in a particular setting. So this is the overall definition of qualitative research. So you need to make sure that when you are approaching or selecting this methodology, you will have to do something either with documents, manuscripts, text, images, or you are going to do something with people. So this is the main definition based on the objects that you start to process and treat. Okay, another definition. When we look at different definitions, another definition pops up. Qualitative research relies primarily on words, images, and some kind of description as opposed to numbers in quantitative studies. And you need to keep that into account. When we do qualitative research, we are looking at images, we look at words, we try to group people under different categories, we are observing behavior. We are analyzing, trying to understand, trying to interpret, trying to describe. And in this sense, qualitative research is strongly bound to text, words, images, and descriptions compared to quantitative research. Well, another definition looks at qualitative research and tries to distinguish it in the context of quantitative research. With qualitative research, we seek understanding. We are looking to understand something. We are trying to go in depth. While when we do quantitative research, we are trying to generalize. We're trying to get more objective, generalizable information. And the mixed research is always between both, trying to benefit from both. However, mixed research is very complex because it requires you to master both methodologies, the quantitative methodology and the qualitative one. Okay. Let's look at another type of classification. When we look at qualitative research as shown in here, it's more seen as broad, whole picture, exploratory, while quantitative is seen as narrow, focused, and conclusive. And this is another way to compare both approaches regarding the hypothesis, the description, and the type of research. And in general, we consider qualitative research more flexible compared with quantitative research. It can be spontaneous with quality of data, and it has an ease of analysis. However, I need to warn you here, qualitative research takes a huge amount of time, and this is the risk here when we talk about qualitative research methods. Another table can show us some differences. Qualitative research is focused on meaning of experience. It's looking more from a philosophical roots on the constructivism, the interpretivism. When we look at the goals of the investigation, they are seeking understanding, describing, and discovering. When we look at the design characteristic, flexible, evolving, and emergent. And data collection is mainly looking at the researcher as an instrument. He or she is getting immersed in the process by extracting the information, either from documents or images, or getting it out from people. So, now, what are the goals of qualitative research? In general, when we look at the different approaches of research, there are goals. When you look at testing, then it's testing whether theory is appropriate or not. And this is something we try to do when we conduct qualitative research. Or we try to explain. So we are inquiring why something happens. Or we start to describe. And some people underestimate the importance of description, because sometimes we have serious problems we are unable to understand, and we do not find the documentation about it. So therefore the description is important, because it can provide further detailed description on a certain phenomena or a certain behavior. And also we look, when we do qualitative research, to explore. So when we have no previous knowledge, academic knowledge in this sense about the topic, we start to explore using qualitative research methods. So these are all goals that you can use or embed in your research design when you conduct qualitative research. And normally we test whether theory is applicable to the study domain, then we are in the testing, in the exploration side. But when we try to build a theory on study domain, then we are more in the description and the exploration. Well, also another goal of qualitative research is to identify and characterize the patterns of behavior or individual group interactions or individual perceptions, or identifying important factors, or informing predictions about relationships. So these are also goals that you can select when you perform a qualitative research. So this is an overall idea about the goal of qualitative research methodology, or methods in general. Now, how do I know if qualitative research is the right approach for my study? Well, you have to consider the nature of the phenomena you want to study. And you need to determine what you know about the phenomena, and you need to be clear with your goal, and this has to do with your research question. So when you are in the phase of creation or preparation of your research, and you are consulting with your peers or consulting with your supervisors, this moment is very important, because at that moment you will need to define a clear research question based on a specific problem definition, and from there you can start to first ask yourself, am I going to approach and answer my research question through a methodology that is qualitative or quantitative? So it's very important to take this into account. Well, but in order to answer this question and to be able to select a method, first of all, what are the existing qualitative research methods? As you know, qualitative research is a methodology, but entails several methods. So what are the methods that are part of the qualitative research methodology in general? Well, as you can see, this is one of the classifications that I found on internet, and as you can see, we can say qualitative research method can be one-on-one interview, people are involved, focus group discussion, people are involved, ethnographic research, people are involved, and you are here more observing them, case study research, which is considered more on the desktop, record keeping, you go into archives, you go into historical data, you go into public records, and you start to look at these records and you start to analyze them. So you are again in the desktop, you are looking at documents, or process of observation. It's similar to the ethnographic, but here, if the ethnographic research is focused on human beings and their behavior and their relations, here you are looking on observation of phenomena in general in your research domain. So these are different examples of methods of qualitative research, and it will be very important that you have an idea on these methods so that you are able to select the best method according to your research question. Okay, so what are also another qualitative methods? Well, we can classify them through a different definition in a text. First of all, documents review. We look to identify patterns or communications, describe characteristics of organizations or processes. This is the documents reviews. We can look at also observation. Here we are trying to learn about behaviors and interactions in natural settings, study cultural aspect of a setting or particular context. When we talk about interviews, mainly in-depth interviews, we try to explore individual experiences and perception in rich detail. Another type or method of qualitative research is the focus groups. Focus groups, here we try to generate unique insights into shared experiences and social norms and practices, and this is another approach. A fifth approach is the usability testing, and it's a very interesting method under the qualitative research where we try to inform on design decision and usability issues and find solutions for them and interactions between human being and a certain phenomena or a certain object or a certain decision approach. So this is also an interesting method. Another method is the case study research, very famous, where we look here at research strategy that investigate a phenomena or interaction within its real life context. And here it is a mix of observations with a documentation. We have also the intervention research where we try to have systematic study of purposive change strategies, and this is considered a quasi-experimental method. And we have the ethnographic research where we look at observing and interacting with participants and their real life environment. And I added one more, which is the sketching study, where we try to have observational sketching to generate a different form of visual data which has considerable potential of understanding or highlighting or articulating a certain perception of humans or understanding of humans. Well, those are all examples of methods. There's a lot of different methods, much more, but those are the most famous one. Don't hesitate to go beyond that, and in the following detailed videos we will explain some of them in specific detail. Well, now what are the approaches when we do qualitative research? Well, we have two main approaches. The first approach, we call it the deductive research. So the deductive approach is aimed at testing theory, and an inductive approach is mainly concerned with the generation of new theory emerging from data. So mainly I have data and I'm trying to look at interpreting this data to build up a theory. And this is called the deductive approach, where we try to test, explain general relation from data. We try to make from the data, find patterns, find relations, and from there we build up a theory. Opposed to this deductive approach, we have the inductive approach. Well, here we try from general to specific, while we try to do inductions, moving from more specific to more general. And here it is a different approach when we have exploration and general relationship, and these are two different approaches when you have here in this sense theory and you try to move from the theory to data. So you have a general theory that explains or sets as kind of rule or a general expectation, and then you go through data to test this theory and make sure if it works or not. So those are the two major approaches when we conduct qualitative research. Now, moving to the fourth part of our presentation, sampling. Sampling is a very important component of qualitative research and also quantitative research. But in the context of qualitative research, you need to know that you will sample, meaning that you will have a lot of information and you need to have a sample. So when we look at qualitative research methods, we can say, what is the definition of sampling? Sampling can differ depending on your research method. When we are talking about people-based methods, then we are sampling mainly population. People that we will interview, how many people we will interview, and so on. How many people are we going to discuss with a certain problem for focus group discussion. The same that goes with sampling. On the opposite side, we call it coding. Coding is then something related to what kind of documents are you going to select. Because again, when you have your object of data or your data input coming from documents, then also you'll need to do a sampling approach. What is the meaning of that? I need to select consciously the documents that I'm going to treat and process, and I need to start to code them, meaning I find meanings and start to group these documents and synthesize them under certain concepts and certain codes, so that later on I can create a summary and a better understanding. So sampling in this sense is important, and I always ask my researchers when they select a document-based methodology, I tell them what kind of documents are you going to explore, how many, in which domain, do you have a limit of documents, and the same when it comes to population-based methods. I ask them how many people are you going to interview, and so on and so on. Well, what is sampling in qualitative research? Well, we look, as I told you, at population or documents, the entire aggregation of cases that meet a specified set of criteria. And here we need to have eligibility criteria that determines the attributes or the descriptions of the target population. So once we have we decided which methodology and method we will select, we need to work on the sampling. And the number one question when I ask somebody what will be your sampling, you need to be able to answer, because in this sense you need to say what will be the aggregation of cases that you will meet your criteria, and in this sense you need to have a criteria to make a selection. Also, sample entails the process of selecting a portion of the overall population to represent the entire population. The same if we are doing it with papers. So, for example, if you are looking at documents, it will be the process of selecting a portion of the documents or images or manuscripts or general artifacts to represent the entire artifacts. Imagine you have access to the archives of a certain epoch or a certain time period. You will need also to sample, because you will need to select certain documents in certain times to make sure that this is representative. Otherwise, you will have an exhaustive research on exploring or going through a lot of documents. So sampling here is very important. Also, we need to make sure when we do sampling that we will have access to our samples. So this is called the accessible population or accessible artifacts, and this is the population of people available for the study, or the artifacts that are available for our studies. So here is accessibility very important to look at, and for sure after we define our sample of people or of artifacts or documents, then we need to define the target population, which is the entire population in which the researcher is interested and to which he or she wants to generalize the results. So when I ask you what is your target population or what is your target documents, then you say it will be the National Archives between 1962 till 1965, or it can be people who are in a certain age category, working, pensioned, and they have living single, for example. So the target population is the overall, the entire population of your pool of information that you will later start to sample from to conduct your research. Well, how to sample in qualitative studies? In general, we use in qualitative research small samples. We do not use large samples like in quantitative research methods. We do non-random samples. So we do purposive sampling. We can select our own people without doing that are non-random. We do sample design during the process, so it's emergent. I can be in the process of interviewing people, and then I am in this process starting to continue selecting others. So it doesn't need to be preset early on. I will have most probably a small sample size, like I said before, and the sample size depends mainly on the informal needs. So I do not go and look at representative samples or large-scale samples. Data saturation can make it can allow me to stop once I have a saturation, meaning that the results that I'm getting out from people are repeating, or from documents. I can stop and do not continue my process because the sample is giving a saturation. And sampling to the point at which a new information is obtained and redundancy is achieved. So this is the definition of data saturation. Also, we do we evaluate the sample plans based on adequacy, based on appropriateness, and based on using the best informal for the sample, those who will provide the best information. So sampling in this sense is not very rigid or formal like quantitative methods. It's more here evolving, emerging, and there's a flexibility with your sample when you do qualitative research in general. In general, when you look at sampling methods, the probability sampling and the random sampling, this is used mainly for quantitative methods. But in our approach in qualitative research, we do purposive sampling. So we select ourselves until we reach a certain saturation and we assure heterogeneity. And then we also do select our own respondents, like I told you, based on interactions and based on informal approaches. So these are the major difference between quantitative sampling and qualitative sampling methods. So this is how you do your sampling. Well, this is another overview on the different methods. I did not provide all of them, but I just highlighted in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, case studies, and usability testings. Those are all methods under qualitative research methodology, and the objective of those methods are varying. Let's start with in-depth interviews. The objective of in-depth interview is to describe and to test, and the sample size in this sense is always small, and the number of variables is large. So we investigate different topics, different parameters, different conditions, but we have a small sample of people. When it comes to focus group discussion, we are trying also to describe and test, but the sample size is medium. We are looking at groups, so we are talking about groups of 12, 20, 25, even more. And we are looking at a large number of variables, parameters, point that we are discussing with our focus group in general. Now moving to the case studies, when we look at the objective here is to explore, describe, and explain. But the sample size is small and the number of variables is large. So we just select 3 case studies as a minimum to start with. Sometimes it's only 1 if it's a difficult context. It depends on the state of development regarding the research question. But we say in general 3 or more for case studies, and then we start to look at different parameters associated with our case study. And finally, when we look at usability testing, we try here to explain and to test. The sample size is medium, again similar to the focus group discussion. We are talking about 12 plus, 25, 30, 40, 50, 60, very great. And we are looking at a small variable variations because we want to focus on testing an interaction, for example, or a correlation in a certain settings. So this table is very useful to start with, to have an idea what are the sampling approaches, what kind of sample size do I need, and what kind of variation I can have with my parameters, and what are the objectives associated with each method. And therefore you as a researcher, you'll need to know what are the overall qualitative research methods available in order to be able to pick up one or more that corresponds to your research question. Now I'm almost moving to the end of my presentation, and I need to highlight something very important when we conduct qualitative research methods. It is called validation. Validation is a very important key step, and the definition of validity in qualitative research, by default, qualitative research produces subjective results. However, the role of researcher is to avoid the bias and assure replicability. So it's very important to take into account that qualitative research by default is producing subjective research, because the researcher is influencing strongly the research approach, and it's very difficult to make it objective. We do not focus much on the representation. We do not focus much on the sampling, a large sample size. We are not looking here to generalization. We are looking here mainly to understand. We need to understand. We need to interpret. We need to observe relations. And since this work is done by the researcher, it is subjective, which is fine. It does not undermine it. It does not make it less important, but it needs to have a very important, serious step where we show to the scientific community where we are publishing or sharing our results that yes, it is subjective. We made deliberate choices. However, we were not biased. We made our best to avoid bias. So let me explain to you how to avoid bias and how to prove that we can have a replicability of our research. Well, questions that we pose in order to validate our research in qualitative methods. Can you study results become generalized to a wider population? A point of discussion. Did you measure what was intended to be measured. And here we are talking about something called the internal validity opposed to the external validity. This first question, can you study results become generalized to a wider population? This is generalization. This is the external validity. We try, after we conduct our research, to ask ourselves, do my finding that I came up are able to be generalized? Can I generalize them to different contexts, to different communities, to similar population or not? So this is external validity. Then I start to ask myself, did I measure what was intended to be measured? And this is related to the intention, and in the intention of my research related to the reality, and this is called the internal validity. And based on those approaches, we look at 4 major concepts. When we talk about internal validity, we are looking at the credibility and the confirmability of your research. And when we look at external validity, we are looking at transferability and dependability. And it's very important for you as a researcher to start to learn about these validation approaches, looking at the internal validity of your approach and the external validity of your approach. So validity here is crucial to make sure that you are not biased and that you are serious in your approach, and that replicability is possible. So, just a small glimpse on mixed methods. Well, people who select mixed methods, what do? They simply decide not to ignore numbers, and in the same time they do not want to ignore the human experience. So they are between those 2 words of qualitative and quantitative, and they start to say, okay, I want to combine numbers, the quantitative approach, with human experiences, the qualitative approach or documents, and I do mixed method where you can get the best out of qualitative and quantitative methodology. However, I warn you, you need to be well trained in this area, because you need to master 2 methodologies with their different methods, and it's difficult. And in our sector of, in my domain of sustainable building or the construction sector in general, we do, for example, post-occupancy evaluation. The same healthcare, in healthcare they do also this mixed method. So in post-occupancy evaluation in the building sector, we start to identify and describe user experiences. We try to observe people and their behavior, but in the same time we combine that with vital signs on temperature and indoor environmental quality and overall measures related to comfort conditions. So as you can see, we have numbers, we have people, we have behavior, and we try to mix it, and this is called post-occupancy evaluation in the architectural, engineering and construction industry. And in healthcare they do the same. You will go to any medical sector or medical field, they try always to combine the human experience with the vital signs of your blood pressure, sugar, and so on in blood and so on. So you can see that some areas they combine the mixed approach. So let's go to the conclusion of today's presentation. I give you some recommendation, and do not forget that your research design is very important. You need to keep into account what will be the data you will collect, how you will process it, what will be the thing that you are looking to create, and how are you going to test it and validate it. And in order to come up with that, you should have developed your research question and defined your research problem. But in this sense, the aim of this presentation is to help you to select, is qualitative research methodology in general suitable for me or not, and which type of method I'm going to select. So qualitative methods can provide unique contribution to human-centered research. So this is one thing to keep into account. There are rigorous and widely accepted procedures for study, sampling, data collection, and data analysis, and even data validation. You need just to go deeper and inquire and learn about it, so that when you are starting your research, you are conscious and you are knowledgeable enough in order to do all these steps in a good way, in a perfect way, and to deliver good results, avoid bias, and guarantee or assure replicability. Well, by that I would like to end to my presentation. I would like to invite you to subscribe to my channel. There are following videos related to qualitative research method and quantitative research method. Don't hesitate to comment, subscribe, like the presentation if you like, and share your comments if you have any special requests. By that, I would like to thank you for your attention. This was a presentation on qualitative research methods, and thanks again.